My name is Katie Stewart, and I'm a student project manager at the Clark Forum. On behalf of the Clark Forum, the Legislative Initiative Against the Death Penalty, the Unitarian Universalists of the Cumberland Valley, the Office of Religious Life and Community Services, and the Dickinson College Departments of Religion, Philosophy, and English, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's lecture, Dead Man Walking, The Journey Continues. This lecture is the 11th annual Fred Speaker Memorial Lecture, an event dedicated to helping abolish the death penalty in Pennsylvania. It is named for former Pennsylvania Attorney General Fred Speaker, who ended electric chair executions in the state. The death penalty has been used as a form of punishment in America since the founding of the colonies, with a brief moratorium from 1972 to 1976. Has American society benefited from the utilization of the death penalty? Since 1976, 1,097 people have been executed in the United States. Of these executions, 897 took place in the southern states. However, while 80% of the executions in the United States take place in the South, the region still has the highest murder rate in the country, suggesting that the death penalty does not serve as a deterrent to murder. Along with geographical region, race and class tend to play a role in who receives the death penalty and who does not. Statistics show that there is a bias in the system in which those accused of killing white people are executed more often than those whose victims are people of color. There is also a correlation between the economic wealth of a defendant and his or her chances of receiving the death penalty. Poor defendants are unable to afford adequate representation and therefore often receive the death penalty due to mistakes or lack of effort on the part of their attorneys. Furthermore, some concerned analysts view the death penalty as a form of cruel and unusual punishment because all methods of execution cause severe physical and emotional pain. For example, during lethal injection, if the needle misses a vein or becomes clogged, the prisoner will experience excruciating pain. Pain can also result due to incorrect proportions of the drug combination. The European Union is firmly against the use of the death penalty, and all member states except Latvia have abolished it as a means of punishment. So if the death penalty does not act as a deterrent to crime, is employed arbitrarily based on region, race, and wealth, causes severe pain to the prisoner, and is generally rejected by developed nations, why does the United States still use it as an acceptable means of punishment? Sister Helen Prejean began her death penalty ministry in 1982 when she was asked to become a pen pal of Elmo Patrick Sanier, a death row inmate of the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola. Later, she started to travel back and forth from her home in the St. Thomas Housing Project, where she helped the poor in the community to the prison to visit with Sanier. She became a spiritual advisor and gained intimate knowledge of the United States death penalty system during her visits to death row and struggled to earn Sanier a stay of execution. This first contact awakened her to the fallibilities and immoral nature of the death penalty system in the United States. Sister Helen has come to counsel other death row inmates and murder victims' families and now actively works to obtain a moratorium on the death penalty in the United States. To date, she has personally witnessed 5 executions. Sister Helen has written 2 books based on her experiences, Dead Man Walking, an eyewitness account of the death penalty in the United States, and The Death of Innocence, Wrongful Executions, both of which highlight the problems with using the death penalty as a form of punishment. Dead Man Walking has received numerous awards and honors, including a nomination for the Pulitzer Prize in 1993 and the #1 spot on the New York Times bestseller list for 31 weeks. The book was made into a film starring Susan Sarandon as Sister Helen, and an opera premiered in San Francisco by the San Francisco Opera. Along with her writings and lectures, Sister Helen works with activist organizations to achieve a moratorium on the death penalty. She has worked with the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, Amnesty International, and the Moratorium Campaign, of which she is honorary chairperson. In 2000, Sister Helen, along with other representatives, presented then Secretary General of the UN, Kofi Annan, with a petition of 2.5 million signatures calling for a worldwide moratorium on the death penalty. Sister Helen joined the Sisters of St. Joseph Umadai in 1957. She earned a BA in English and Education from St. Mary's Dominican College in New Orleans in 1962 and an MA in Religious Education from St. Paul's University in Ottawa, Canada in 1973. At this time, I would like to remind you to please silence all cell phones and pagers. At the conclusion of Sister Helen's remarks, there will be a question and answer session. Since this event is being taped and some of our audience members are hearing impaired, please wait for a microphone to reach you before asking your question. After the question and answer session, the Legislative Initiative Against the Death Penalty's Justice Award will be presented to Pennsylvanians who do outstanding work opposing the death penalty. Following tonight's program, there will be a book signing in the lobby, and petitions for the moratorium campaign will be available for you to sign. I would like to thank Joanna Buck, board member of the LIADP, for providing the art exhibit located in the lobby. Also, I would like to invite you to join continuing the conversation at 12:30 tomorrow afternoon in the Clark Forum building, where further conversation on this topic will take place. Thank you, and please join me in welcoming Sister Helen Prejean.
Thank you. We have some work to do. Good work. I looked over my shoulder, and it was 1982, and I visited a man on death row, and my whole life changed. And how long ago was that now? 82 to 92 to 2002. I mean, it's 25 years ago. Still at it. And it's about waking up. These 20 years of speaking to the American public in every venue you can imagine. It's not about a people. We are not a people who are hung up on vengeance, that we want to see people killed. The death penalty is so far removed from us, and it's not one of the moral questions that maybe we've considered very deeply, because it's not one of the moral questions that's hit us personally. I mean, most of us, thank God, don't have somebody murdered in our family, but how do we reflect on this? I mean, the killing chambers, the death row in Graterford is around 100 miles away from where we are right here, but it could be in India. I gave a talk to Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas, and I told the kids that night, you know, right down the street there in Huntsville, they've killed 400 people. By then, it was about 350. And I said, the busiest execution chamber in the United States is right down the street from you. And it could be in India, because we're removed from it. And that's not entirely by accident. The death penalty is almost a secret ritual. Just a few witnesses chosen from the state to witness an execution. Efforts have been made to make the death penalty public for people to see what it means to have Pennsylvania kill people. I mean, the state of, where you have the city of brotherly and sisterly love. And why is this? Well, let me tell you about my journey. I didn't start out knowing about the death penalty. All during my high school years, I didn't even realize that there was a portable electric chair in Louisiana that was brought to the different cities. Because as Katie mentioned, the South is where we really do executions. You have 262 people on death row. You have killed 3 people, and they were all volunteers. So you have never even been able, you put this whole machinery of death in place, and you've killed 3 people, but because they wanted to give up their appeals and die. And you've had to release 6 people who were innocent. And 262 people sit less than 100 miles from here in cells 6 feet by 8.5 feet, 23 out of 24 hours a day locked up waiting to die. And so how did I wake up? Slowly. And first it was to understand in my own faith as a Christian and believing in Jesus and trying to follow the way of Jesus, that Jesus was on the side of poor people and that I needed to be involved with poor people. For a long time I wasn't. But when we're not awake, we're not awake. I mean, when the ethical charge comes to us when we wake up and when we know, oh, wow, I didn't know this, then we're called to do something. You know, everybody was aware of Katrina. where our mother house is in New Orleans, our sisters had been in New Orleans since 1850. We lost the mother house, we lost 3 convents, and we lost 17 vehicles. And then our sisters were dispersed. There are just 12 of us now in New Orleans. And where our mother house was located, and for many years, that's where I had my novitiate training. It's where I was the one to train our novices. Almost right in the backyard, abutting the property, was one of the 10 major housing projects where African-American people live in New Orleans. And I had never been to any one of them. 50% of our people live in poverty. And when Katrina hit, over 100,000 people who were poor and didn't have cars had no way of being evacuated from the city. And we have to ask ourselves this question: how in the 21st century can there be the most biggest natural disaster of a storm that hit a major American city, and there was no plan for buses to come for over 100,000 people who didn't have cars? How did that happen? And I want to go to myself, because all those years I didn't visit people who were in the housing project. And we have been made so afraid of certain areas of our city. And it's not that fear was really my big thing. It was just that I was unaware. And I thought, well, you know, some people may be called to go work with the poor. I didn't know it was integral to the gospel of Jesus. I said, Jesus said the poor you'll always have with you. I mean, you know, it's always been that way. They got some people rich, some people poor. That's just the way the world is. And I was overwhelmed. I'm one little person in the world. I'm going to change that? But then when I did wake up, I woke up, and it was at a talk. It was at a conference. Nuns go to a lot of conferences. We go to a lot of meetings and all. And I'd heard, though, and I was not excited, that this nun who was going to come talk to us, it was going to be about all that social justice. We couldn't shake all this stuff from the nuns with the social justice. So we had the social justice nuns, and we had the spiritual nuns. Those of us that were doing retreats and everything said, look, we're nuns, we're not social workers. How are we going to tackle racism or poor public education or people not living in affordable houses or not having health care and all that? And my approach was, this was God's problem. I just prayed, and I asked God to take care of these big things. And I thought my job was to be charitable to people, you know, be kind to people, serve people, be a good teacher, and be kind to my students. But I didn't get it. I mean, I really didn't get it about justice. And Sister Maria Augusta Neal, this is the story in Dead Man Walking of my awakening. And she gave us a talk, 3 days of talks at Terre Haute, Indiana. All of us got on buses. We all went to Terre Haute. We were captive audience. We got this social justice, and we got it for 3 days. Maybe with the grace of God, I can come through unscathed, trying to make us all into social workers. First day I did come through unscathed because Maria Augusta Neal, who taught sociology in the New Testament at Emmanuel College for 40 years, told us about the situation of the world and, you know, the living standards of people, how many children were starving, and yet the gross national product for the United States, we're 6% of the world's population. We consume 40% of the world's goods, produce 1/4 of all the global warming. I I knew things weren't fair. And so then she announced the next day she was going to talk about Jesus, and I thought like I was home free. What's she going to tell me about Jesus? I'd made the spiritual exercise at St. Ignatius. I'd studied scripture at Notre Dame. I taught scripture classes. What's she going to tell me about Jesus? Next day, I'm poised. Here we go. And I could tell you the line, she said, that changed the spiritual trajectory of my life. And she said, Jesus preached good news to the poor. And I thought I knew what was coming next. I thought she was going to say, like, God so loves you, God's like a father. God's so close you can call God like Abba, like every hair of your head is numbered. Like the Heavenly Father lets rain fall on the just and unjust. And she said, integral to the good news that Jesus preached to poor people was that they would be poor no longer. And I'm thinking, where did he say that? And of course, I have never even been into any poor neighborhood. I was like the little girl that wrote that essay, The Poor Family. Once it was a very poor family. The mother was poor, the father was poor, the children were poor, the butler was poor, the chauffeur was poor, the gardener was poor, whole family was poor. And it was like me, and that the poor will be poor no longer, and it's like suddenly I got it. It's justice is integral to a community of faith, that you can't just announce to people that God loves them. And if Jesus had been one of those dreamy preachers that just gathered people on the hillside, everybody whipped out their little guitars, says, God loves us all, God loves us all, I love you, you love me, sing, everybody love one another right now, and share your little picnic basket, and go home, they never would have crucified Jesus. What got him killed? He had to go up in the face of systems where people were threatened, where the temple cult and the hierarchy of his day was threatened, and definitely the Romans were threatened. And what was it? It was the kind of community he inaugurated that nobody had ever seen before, where everybody was treated with respect, and little children who weren't even considered persons, you just had a whole lot of them to send out in the field so the family could live. And he holds up a child and says, whoever receives a child, the least of these, the weak, the powerless, the voiceless, the people marginated, the people looked upon as scum. And I went, oh my God, I've never even met people that are marginated and poor and voiceless. And the people that were left behind in Katrina during those days, I never would have even had a heart for it. That, oh yeah, those things happen, just made a mistake. Happened not to have buses. Happened to make a mistake. There are 180,000 people who have left New Orleans, and 120,000 of them are African American people, and there is no plan to bring back poor African American people into our city. In fact, this past week, HUD just reinforced a decision that was made in New Orleans to destroy 3,000 units of affordable housing, and people are not going to be coming back. And we're gentrifying the city. Rents have tripled. What happens to poor people? And I learned that at Katrina. Poor people are drowning all the time. It isn't just hurricanes that drown people. Poverty drowns people. And you die when you don't have health care. You die when you don't have a decent education so that you can leave school and have a decent job. You die when you, like I saw when I moved to St. Thomas and I'm working in the Adult Learning Center, you come into the Adult Learning Center, well, how far did you get in school? 11th grade. Oh, well, look, you don't have far to go to get your GED. Let's see where you are in your reading. And they can't read a third grade reader. And they're a junior in high school and they're going to graduate the next year and they can't read. How does that happen? Is it happening in your state? Is it happening in the city? Where are our poor? And I wake up late, very late. But you know what I figured out? It doesn't matter how old we are when we wake up. It's what we do when we wake up. And God's grace unfolds in us like the petals of a flower. It's all very organic. We have a maxim in the community, never leap ahead of grace. It's the Sister of St. Joseph thing. Boy, me, I used to be leaping all the time. Sometimes I'm leaping with grace, sometimes I'm not. But then I hear this deep in my heart that to work for justice and to be on the side of poor people in these issues is the work of Jesus in the world, and I had a lot to learn. And I moved into the St. Thomas Housing Projects with 4 other sisters, and I began to live among the people. Now, you got to know, when I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in the 40s and 50s, African-American people had been our servants in our family. My daddy was a lawyer, and he was successful. And we had people work for us. And we were always kind. It was always charity. My mother and father were never mean to people, but I never questioned the system that made people ride in the back of buses, or at the Hart Theater and Paramount Theater, where black people had to sit up in the balcony and couldn't sit with the white people, or Sacred Heart Church, where black people had to sit over in one special section. The church was segregated too. And when we made our first communion, black kids had to wait and make their first communion to be united with Christ after the white people's kids made communion. But I'm unaware. I'm going, that's just the way it is. But always be kind, people. Always be charitable to people. But there's a big difference between charity to individual people and justice. Because justice makes us look at the system and say, wait a minute, what's going on here? There's a whole system that has put people on death row in Pennsylvania. Do you think it's an accident that over 70% of the people sentenced to death in your state are African American people? Do you think it's even a mistake that half of the people who are on death row in Pennsylvania come from Philadelphia with a particularly avid prosecutor or district attorney who goes for the death penalty every chance she or he gets? Is that an accident? What's the system? Katie was referring to it. There's a system going on here. We have to understand it. And those are questions of justice. So I go to St. Thomas and I begin to learn everything but from the perspective of being poor. And now for the first time, the people who had been my servants, and it's justice. It isn't just great little white lady coming in now to help the poor black people. Nope. It was justice. So I'm at the Adult Learning Center, and now I'm able to serve people who had served and long served in our state. I mean, what do you know if you don't know people, real people? And it's while I was there that one day, coming out of the Adult Learning Center, a friend of mine coming out of the Prison Coalition office, it was like so casual. It was almost like a fluke. I mean, we need to ponder sometimes the sneakiness of God. I mean, I don't know what's happened to you, but here I am coming out on St. Andrew Street, and here's Chava coming out of the Prison Coalition office. He bumps into me, he has a clipboard with a project going on, and he meets me, he says, hey, Sister Helen, you want to write somebody on death row here in Louisiana? And I was learning all about justice. I was learning about justice with the police. I was learning about justice in education. I was learning about justice in health care. I was learning about justice in the welfare system and work and mothers and families. And I said, yeah, I could write some letters. I never dreamed they were going to kill this person. It was 1982, and the death penalty had been put back in 76, but we hadn't killed anybody in Louisiana like in over 20 years. There'd been an unofficial moratorium, even before 1972 when the Supreme Court overturned the death penalty, finding it arbitrary and capricious and racially discriminating in its application. We just didn't practice it. And who thought of it? I didn't know anybody on death row, nobody in my family, no relatives, never met anybody who even had 3 or 4 times removed knew somebody on death row. I mean, you don't hang out with death row inmates most of the time. When I first started doing this in the media, people saying, what are you a nun doing on death row? I mean, like, don't nuns, like, teach children and stuff? Like, and I used to say to them, but they didn't get it. Now, I hope you get it. They didn't. I'd say, well, it's the upward mobility of the gospel of Jesus. And so I write a man, Patrick Saunier, and you know what the problem was? He rode back. And there was a relationship between two people across a great divide, a Catholic nun writing to a man on death row in Louisiana and not knowing anything about the criminal justice system. Even though Daddy was a lawyer, you got to want to talk about all that legal stuff. I mean, you got to be motivated to talk about the law. I had never asked questions about the law. And I had an assumption that if something is the law, that it was somehow holy, that you wouldn't have a law in a nation unless it was right and just. I didn't have any idea that maybe you might have a law that was very unjust and against our deepest principles. I didn't know that, never questioned that. And I said, and we got the best court system in the world in the United States. So if they're on death row, they had to be guilty. And maybe they didn't have a perfect lawyer, but they must have had an adequate lawyer. The Constitution of the United States says that anybody's on trial for their life and up against the powers, the individual up against the powers of the state, is to be given an attorney. I never dreamed that
It might not be fair. In fact, it might be grossly unfair, like I knew when I wrote Death of Innocence and accompanied 2 people to execution that I believe were innocent. And when you read the stories, you decide for yourself. Just know, when you read those stories, you know more than the jury who sentenced them to death knew, because information was withheld from them and lies were told to them, and they didn't know when they were being lied to. I mean, think for a minute of this death penalty where we're going to play God. And we'd take a whole little section of you right there in the middle, say, okay, you 12 people, go behind those closed doors. Now, we presented the case to you. You've heard the mother of the victim's family saying, my child was killed, give me justice, give us the ultimate penalty because I'm mourning my child, do that for me. And you've heard the mother of the one to be killed coming up and just saying, please don't kill my child. I know he did a terrible thing, but please, please don't kill my child. I wasn't a good mother. I didn't give him what he needed. I know he did a terrible thing, but please don't kill my child. Please vote for him to live. What are you going to do? You know that story in the Bible about Solomon and the 2 ladies? They both claimed it was their babies. You know, he's known for his wisdom. It's chicken feed next to what Solomon did to deal with life and death. And shall we let people live or shall they die? And the Supreme Court's supposed to be setting up the criteria for us to be able to know that we only give the death penalty when it's the worst of the worst. Well, how do you have all this racism in here? How do you have 70% of African American people on death row in Pennsylvania? How do we have death rows across this country, 3,000 people on death row, and 8 out of every 10 of people who are there, it's because it killed white people. And when you kill people of color in this country, it doesn't count. It's rare that the death penalty is sought for the death of a person of color. What does that say? I mean, maybe in the theory of the death penalty, when there are these terrible murders, well, they shouldn't live. But remember, we're the ones who are going to have to put it into practice. Just human, fallible, biased, prejudiced, weak, us. Finally, it's us. I not only write the man, I realized he didn't have anybody to come and visit him. And he didn't even ask me to come. He never asked me for any. He was just glad somebody had found him who was writing him letters. He'd put on the back of the envelopes, Jesus loves you, Sister Helen, and so do I. And then his mother couldn't come. She came once, and she almost had a nervous breakdown because when she walked in, she saw death row and saw her son in a cell waiting to be killed, and she couldn't handle it. She'd had a hard life anyway, and mentally she wasn't very strong. And she left weeping, and he said, look, Mama, wrote her, don't come back. It's okay, Mama. You pray for me, Mom, and just send me a little note every now and then. And I'm reading these letters, and I realized he's alone, and he's condemned to death. And I was praying one morning with a part of the scriptures that I love, and it was Matthew 25. I was hungry, and you gave me to eat. And all of a sudden, there it was. I mean, it was like those words jumped out. I was in prison, and you came to me. If we're going to have a visit, he's sure not going to commute to see me. I was in prison, and you came to me. And so I wrote him, and I said, I'll come visit you. And here's the sneakiness of God, part 2. One was writing a letter. And then the other was, he was so excited when I said I would come visit. And he sent me the papers you have all these visitor forms, and he has to put you down on the list, and they had these different categories: friend, girlfriend, relative, spiritual advisor. And he says, look, I'm a Catholic, and you're a nun. Will you be my spiritual advisor? I fill it in, yes. Gave my Social Security number. No, I have no felonies. And sent it into the prison. Not realizing 2.5 years later, after I will visit him, accompany him, shoulder with him his remorse for the crime, that they will kill him at midnight in the electric chair, and at 5:45 in the evening, everybody's got to leave the death house except the spiritual advisor, who will walk with him and whose face he will look at as they kill him who will be me. And never leap ahead of grace never had so much meaning for me, because I never could have done that. If I had known when I wrote the first letter, and it'd be like this searchlight down to the end of the path, all we have is a little pocket flashlight, the next step. And so that's going to be my journey. And we're going to get there at the end. And he's going to go, Sister Helen, thank you. If you see the film of Dead Man Walking, it's a composite of two people that I was with, whose stories are told in Dead Man Walking. Pat Saunier, though, was the one who said, it figures that I have to come to prison to find love. It's amazing. Over 90% of people on death row were abused as children. The road to prison is a sorrowful road. None of this is to condone the crimes that people do. If you find yourself struggling with the death penalty and you look in the paper and see the death through terrible violence of innocent people and find yourself feeling outrage at the crime, I just want to say that outrage is ethically and morally legitimate. We should be outraged when we hear of the death of innocent people. And that's one part of our hearts. And then it's like, what are we going to do with that outrage as a society? And how are we going to respond is the other part. And so I go to visit Patrick Saunier. And then I find out he has a brother who's serving 2 life sentences for the same murder. I don't know what the crime is yet. I'm going to find out. And then that was my very first legal question. How could there be a murder, one brother gets death and one brother gets life? How could that happen? Did you know that if there are 2 people who do a murder, and if one is willing to give state's evidence against the other and say, yeah, he did it, they get a reduced sentence for doing that in a courtroom? How do we know we're getting the truth? And that's finally what's really going to emerge for me in Death of Innocence, as I begin to accompany these people and go, my God, we got guilty people along with innocent people. How do we get to an ultimate truth and confidence in truth enough to be able to say, yeah, you die? I mean, with all the mistakes we're making now, we've been shaken. 124 innocent people have come off a death row, saved not because necessarily lawyers did their job or the courts did their job in the appeals, but because college students, volunteers in innocence projects got involved in these cases, stumbled across evidence that the prosecution happened not to have destroyed. I was just with a man, Kirk Bloodsworth, in Maryland, the first one to be freed from DNA, and the judge had saved the DNA evidence in the rape kit in his closet, and it saved Kurt's life because an innocence project got involved in his case, or he'd have been killed in Maryland. And when I meet him the first time, Patrick Saunier, and the guards brought him in, I looked through that heavy mesh screen. He was in like a very small little cubicle, like on one side, handcuffed, hands and feet, and I'm on the other side. And I had been trying to prepare myself, see, for the visit, because I was waiting for the guards to go get him, and I was thinking, I was nervous, because I'm thinking, wait a minute, I've never been with a murderer before. I mean, anybody can write nice letters, I mean, you know, but I'm going to be with him for 2 hours. I don't even know if we're going to be able to have a normal conversation. I mean, you know, what is he like, really like? And I'm holding my cross, and I'm walking up and down in the waiting room there where I'm going to, and he walked in, and I looked through the heavy mirror screen at his face, and I was shocked. I could not believe how human his face was. When I sat with 7 women on death row in Texas, and we all sat around a table, and everybody had their Bible, and we were all talking about who Jesus meant in our life. If you had walked into the room, in fact, there's a picture with them, because then on death row, they had them in white jumpsuits. And so they let us take a picture, and we're standing there with our arms around each other, just like I did with the sisters tonight. We all stand there with our arms around each other. And it was a part of the prison that had like books on the shelf, had little pot plants, so you don't see bars or anything. And when I show people that picture, I say, who do you think the women are? And they go, nurses? And it's all women condemned to death. And Texas has killed 3 women condemned to death. And how many does Pennsylvania have condemned to death now? 3 women. 3 women condemned to death by the state of Pennsylvania. 3 women that we're saying we have to kill. His face was so human. I couldn't believe the humanness. And there was an insight that was so deep, it has stayed with me forever. Like I thought to myself, whatever he has done, and I'm going to have to shoulder what he did. I'm going to have to descend into the evil of what he did and with the victim's family. But whatever he has done, he is worth more than the single worst act of his life, as are we all. Is it not what redemption means? If we had a big screen up here, and we'd show on that screen, each one of us, the worst thing we ever did in our life. Just go there for a minute. You don't have to stay there long. The worst thing we ever did in our life. And then suppose we had somebody say, now that's really, in essence, who you really are. And we're going to go, no, more than that. I know I'm more than that. And so we had a visit for 2 hours, and the 2 hours flew. I didn't have to worry about what I was going to say, because mostly it was just the presence. And he had a caring presence, and he told me everything. Told me about his mama, told me how she cooked venison stew, told me about driving an 18-wheeler. Didn't talk about the crime. And I'm in the car going home back to New Orleans. I went, he didn't talk about the crime. And then I thought, first time I'm going to meet somebody, I'm going to tell them the worst thing I ever did in my life. That was going to take trust. And so I didn't know much about prison ministry. I didn't go to special training. This is what you go do as a spiritual advisor to somebody on death row. I knew the important thing, though, and it was to be faithful. What he did not need was getting a whole bunch of letters from me and saying, oh, yeah, I'm going to come visit, and then I never come visit. And so I've decided on fidelity, and I stayed in that. And so then I meet his brother, because 2.5 hours driving from New Orleans, I might as well meet both of the brothers. And this 18,000-acre prison, which we still call Angola because slaves from Angola worked on the plantation there in Louisiana. Everybody just says Angola. They even got a prison T-shirt saying Angola, no place to be. Or a clever little T-shirt, Angola, a special gated community, attempting humor. So I began to visit both the brothers. And then I did not want to be naive, and I went to the prison, a coalition office, and I said, could I see some background information on the Saunier case? And they say, yeah, and they pulled out all these folders, little bland-looking manila legal folders, put them on a table. It was the end of the day in October. The sun was slanted on that table, and they were leaving the office, and they say, sister, when you leave the office, just pull the door behind you, and I was by myself. Now, I have met Patrick, and I have met Eddie, his brother. And all that I said about their being a human being and worth more than the worst act of their life is going to apply, but boy, it's going to be tough, because when I open up the first file folder and look at a little town in Acadiana in the newspaper, and there are the faces of 2 beautiful teenage kids. A boy, David LeBlanc, 17 years old. A girl, Loretta Bork, 18 years old. And the terrible story in the paper about how the 2 brothers had guns and were in a sugarcane field at night and were hunting. And they would wait. It had happened to 5 other teenage couples, although they had never killed anybody, but they had raped some of the girls. And they would approach the car. It was a lover's lane out by this abandoned sugarcane field outside of St. Martinville. And the brothers would come up, and they'd say, hey, shining the flashlight in on the kids, terrified, because they know there's no way they can get help, and saying, hey, you're trespassing. This is private property. We're the security guards. We work for the people that own this land. What are you kids doing here? Do your parents know where you are? We're afraid we're going to have to go take you to the owners. Your parents are going to be mighty upset when they hear where you've come. And that would go to, well, look, tell you what, the girl has sex with us, we won't bring you to the owners. And nobody need ever know. And the 5 teenage couples who had this done to them, it's not just terror and rape, it's aggravated rape because the men have guns. And this night, though, it took an even more horrible turn because rape is a terrible crime to do against a young woman. And they're found lying by that sugarcane field, and they have been shot in the back of the head. And I read now what the 2 brothers have done. And I am spiritual advisor to the people who killed these 2 innocent kids. And I remember the devastation of it, the horror. It's still, you never get away from that devastated feeling of, oh my God, this is every parent's worst nightmare. Your kids go to a homecoming football game on a Friday night in November and they don't come home alive. And I immediately thought of the parents, and I immediately thought, I ought to reach out to these parents. And then I pulled back and I thought, I'm the spiritual advisor to the people who kill their kids. They're not going to want to see me. They're going to be angry. They'll shut the door in my face. And I stayed away from them. And I met them at the worst possible time. When the last act in Louisiana before you execute somebody is you have a public pardon board hearing. And everybody comes. And when you come into it, you sign the book. It's as close as you'll ever come to going into the Roman amphitheater. If you want somebody to live, you put your thumb up. If you want them to die, you put your thumb down. You sign the book. What side you're on? You're on the side of the state that wants to execute. And then many times the victims' families get caught up in that, and they're there too with all their friends waiting for this moment of justice that they've been promised. Sometimes people wait 15 years for this moment when they're executed. Sometimes they wait 20 years for the moment when the person's executed. And they're promised, they've given this promise. Yes, we're going to seek the ultimate penalty. To seek anything less than that is to dishonor your dead child and you. Only death. They didn't respect your child's human rights. Why should we respect theirs? And it makes the victim's family wait for this moment. And so they're there at the pardon board hearing, and I'm there with 1 lawyer, 1 psychiatrist, and me to ask that Patrick Saunier not be killed, but that he be sentenced to imprisonment, and that's when I met the victim's family. And I don't blame them for their anger at me. I had done it all wrong. I hadn't written them a note. I hadn't called them. Even if they slam down the phone, even if they say, as I've gotten letters now, because after this mistake, I've always reached out to victims' families when I take somebody on death row. And I have the lawyer answer and say, please do not write to these people again. They want to see this person burn in hell. And they want to see you burn in hell, too, for trying to comfort him. Real anger, because people are really suffering, really in pain. And the Bourke family, whose daughter had been killed, were angry. They're still angry to this day at me. And I have to take that anger because I deserve it. But I was totally surprised by the other family. Lloyd LeBlanc and his wife Eula, their son David was killed. He walked right up to me and he said, Sister Prejean. He said, all this time you've been visiting with those 2 brothers and you didn't once come to see us? You can't believe the pressure we under with the death penalty. And I didn't know victims' families wanted the pressure. I thought every victim's family, if given a chance, is going to want the death penalty. I didn't know families split apart over this. I didn't know there were divorces over this. I didn't know that, there might be one in the family who says, yeah, we want death, and somebody else who says, why? How is that going to do anything to kill the person, and families split and clean apart? I didn't know any of that. And he said, Sister, where have you been? He said, why don't you come visit us? You need to hear our side. I pray in this little chapel. Sister, come pray with me. And I did. And Lloyd LeBlanc, the father of David LeBlanc, was only 17, his only son. He said, Sister, I almost lost my wife. For 3 years, Eula cried a river of tears We got this in the film of Dead Man Walking. The film of Dead Man Walking takes you over to both sides, both arms on this cross. Takes you there and then just says, think about it. And that line, that woman cried a river of tears. That was from Lloyd LeBlanc talking about his wife. He said, we had to move David's grave. We had buried him in a family plot in a little town about 50 miles away. We had to move his grave to this church right next to the house so Eula can visit the grave every day. And he taught me, he was the first, about forgiveness. Because he says, you know, in our society, people think forgiveness is weak. People don't understand when I tell them, look, Jesus said to forgive. That's the road I'm going to go down. But he explained it to me like this. He said, you know, after David was killed, he said, I didn't like the way I was feeling because I've always been this kind, loving man. I mean, I love to help people. If I'm on the road in the middle of the night and somebody's broken down, I'm going to get out of my car, I'm good with my hands, I'm going to help them if it takes me until 4 o'clock in the morning. It's who I am. And he said, and those feelings rising up in me of what I wanted to do to the 2 fellas that killed our kid, he said, I didn't like the way that made me feel. And then I thought to myself, they killed our boy, but I'm not going to let them kill me. And I'm going to do what Jesus said. Forgive, to give before. He embodied that hating would make him be destroyed too. And he wasn't going to go there. And he prayed for the grace. And God set his face to go down that road. Because forgiveness isn't one act. It's a path. I end the book with Lloyd LeBlanc. He's the hero of Dead Man Walking. I'm the storyteller. I'm not the hero. I did things wrong. I made mistakes. This man suffered, and he embodies the Spirit of Christ in spite of the fact that his son was taken from him. And the last words of the book are about Lloyd LeBlanc and about forgiveness and how hard it was. Each day it must be prayed for and struggled for and won. And that's the way the book ends. And after Lloyd LeBlanc, then I start going to these murder victim support groups of people who have had people murdered. I have never in my life ever descended into such a sea of sorrow. My life had been relatively cushioned. Now, when I went into St. Thomas, there was violence around and there were deaths that were happening. Blood on the sidewalk from the shooting last night. You know, this recent shooting that just happened in Philadelphia was all over the news today, where the police chief said 100,000 people are killed and injured because of handguns and people being shot in this country. He says, when are we going to take these handguns off the street as a matter of public safety? He said, because if you beat somebody with a bat, they might still live. It's a beating. But a gun, these 2 people didn't have a chance. These 2 guards that were getting the money for the armored truck, and bang, 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 execution style, bang, bang, bang. They had guns. They had no defense. And so Lloyd LeBlanc was the first, and then these murder victims' families. Most people who shoot each other know each other. You know that, don't you? That these thing of guns, that it's mostly people who know the person when they shoot them. But stranger on stranger crime, yeah, there are those too. And that had been the murder of David and Loretta Bork. And I sat in a room with these people. They said, it was a rainy night, I remember, Meadowcrest Hospital in New Orleans, and they said, ooh, it's a real rainy night. We only have 12 people here tonight. And I was so grateful that they were only 12, because I didn't know that the room could even stand any more pain of person after person going around that circle and talking about their child and the loss of their husband, the loss of their wife, the loss of their mother. And it was almost unbearable. And I just sank into it with them. But then here was the thing that shocked me the most. I know I can't even imagine the pain. But then the shocking thing was that so many of them said, you know, after the funeral, everybody just stays away from us because we're in pain and they don't want to say the wrong thing, and they don't come around. They don't come around us. And then I'm realizing They're like pariahs left alone on one end, and you got people on death row treated like pariahs. You did that crime, you're not human like the rest of us, and you deserve to die. And murder victims' families need real help, community around them. They need people accompanying them when they fall apart and come back together, and fall apart when they lose their jobs because they can't focus and they lose their job, and when they're struggling in their marriage to hold it together because they've lost a child. Over 70% of people who lose a child, divorce, whatever fault lines are in the marriage, crack open just from different ways of grieving. Like one wants to keep the child's clothes in the closet like a little shrine, and then the other partner says, well, you know, we got to move on. It's been a year since her death. We need to give the clothes to Goodwill. I mean, look at that. Just think of the anguish in all these decisions of people. And I did one thing. I didn't change everything, but I said, we're going to start a group in New Orleans called Survive, and it's a murder victim support group. I didn't change the whole blooming world. But if we each did one thing, one concrete act, when we become aware of a need to help people make it through this terrible burden that has been placed on them. And along the road over these years, I have met incredible people. I have met victims' families, sometimes, angry, wanting the death penalty. Second story in Dead Man Walking is about the Harveys. Their daughter, Faith Hathaway, was killed brutally. I was with the man, one of the people who killed her, Robert Lee Willie, a really tough character, only had 2 months with him. And they couldn't wait to see Robert die. They had their own, Vernon Harvey, the stepfather, he had his own press conference a week before Robert was to be electrocuted. He said, I wish they'd let me pull a switch myself. Don't you read that in the paper? Sometimes people have lost their child, and especially the fathers, just because they haven't been able to protect their child, and they're just so overwhelmed with pain and anguish and loss. I'll pull the switch myself. I'll lethally inject him myself. And who doesn't understand that if we were placed in that situation? But they were there when Robert was electrocuted. And it attracted national media attention because Louisiana was the first state to let the victim's family sit on the front row to watch the executions. And so afterwards, all the media were waiting for Mr. Harvey. There were the cameras, there were the microphones, there were the lights. They all went up to him after the execution. Said, well, Mr. Harvey, how do you feel now? You got to watch. You've been waiting for this moment, and you got to watch Robert Willie die in the electric chair. How do you feel now? And at first he said, anybody got any Jack Daniels? Anybody want to dance? We got Robert Lee Willie tonight. And I was standing in the parking lot there at the prison, a gravel parking lot, looking across at him. And then he added, but you know what? The SOB died too quick. I hope he burns in hell. And he put his thumb down like that. And I realized he could have watched Robert die 1,000 times. It was never going to be enough. The way Bud Welch puts it is about Timothy McVeigh, his daughter, Julie Marie, was killed in the Oklahoma City bombing. 168 people were killed in that explosion. I flew into Oklahoma City a couple of years afterwards. It's like the whole city was in pain. You know, the 6 degrees of separation and how we know and are connected, because 168 people, somebody knew that. I mean, the whole city. And Bud Welch tells a story. He says, when I heard that explosion, and people had to come because I was at my Texaco station. And Julie Marie knew 3 languages. She had graduated from Marquette. And it was a beautiful thing between Bud and Julie because every Wednesday she and her father had lunch together. The beautiful thing when your kids grow up and get to be adults and there's a friendship between parents and their adult children. It's a very special thing, and he had it. And when the explosion went off and people ran into the station, said, Bud, it's Murrah Center. Isn't that where Julie gets in his car, races? There's a tree that survived the blast. The blast was so tremendous. All the windows were out. It reminded me of Hiroshima. And if you go to the memorial, and they give the exact time the bomb went off, and when you go to Hiroshima, they have the whole memorial park like that, when the atomic bomb went off over Hiroshima. Even a watch that was found in the river with the exact time where the watch had stopped when the bomb went off. And there's a tree that had survived, and they called it the survivor's tree because it's where the families would wait to come out to see who the firemen were going to bring out next. And of course, here is Bud Welch and all the other parents hoping against hope that their loved one had lived. Adults, children killed in that blast. And then he said 2 days later, a fireman brings out Julie's body. And he said, all I could think was, get McVeigh. He said, I'm drinking to go to sleep at night. I'm drinking to get going in the morning. I'm smoking 5.5 half packs of cigarettes a day. And all I can think is, get McVeigh. And he said, I'd go when he was going to have a hearing. And he said, it's a good thing they put that lead vest over him because I'd have been waiting for him because he killed our Julie and all these other people and caused all this pain. He doesn't deserve to live. And then time goes by. And it's a couple of months, and his epiphany of grace happened through the car radio, because one day he's in the car and he goes to turn on the radio and he touches the knob, and he remembers then being in the car with Julie. Car radio was on, news was on, they were talking about an execution in Texas. She had turned to her daddy and said, Dad, that's about nothing but vengeance. And he gets it. She had started an Amnesty International chapter in her high school. He could not honor who his daughter truly is by asking for the death of the man who killed her. And he begins then his journey, similar but in different ways. And he said, you know, as the victims' families that were coming to this, like, this execution is not going to do anything for us, because when we come home after it, we're still going to look at the empty chair. And if you ever see the memorial at Oklahoma City, it is 168 sculpture, metal, empty chairs. Incredible human beings, incredible people just like us, plunged into immense sorrow that they didn't deserve, but who teach us and point the way to us that vengeance was not going to be their choice. And it was about self-preservation in a way, because they didn't want to lose their lives too. The Indian proverb goes, the man who undertakes the journey of revenge must first dig 2 graves. So on one hand, and I naturally think of the cross because it's got the 2 arms that stretch us, the gospel of Jesus is not easy to live in our American society. We live in a cultural ambience where violence is seen as the way we answer our social problems. They killed, we're going to kill them. Terrorists hit us, we kill them too. We target them, and we go and we kill them. And what happens when we unleash that violence? A kind of saying that we can only redeem ourselves through this violence. This violence is necessary. We got to have this violence. And then I'm there when they kill Patrick. I'm there for the 3 days before they killed him. I'm there when they had taken him. He called me on the phone to say the guards took me out of my cell today to weigh and measure me. And I said, hey, what are y'all doing? What, you putting us on Weight Watchers? Tried to make a little joke. He said, they didn't say nothing. They were just quiet. They put me on the scale, wrote it down, measured me, how tall I was. And he said, what the guys are saying, what we all saying is they must be measuring us for our coffins. And then later when I do meet the warden, over these 20 years of coming to this prison and going through 4 or 5 wardens, the warden explained, no, sister, it's not about that. He said, you know, they're going to get a guard of his height and his build, and they're going to do, you know, like a dry run of the execution, because it's not easy for these guards to do, and they kind of have to be prepared for what they're going to do. So they'll do take a guard just the same size as Sonia, and they'll do it when he goes peacefully, and then they'll do it when he fights them every way he can, and they have to then be able to still do their job. You strap the left leg, you strap the right arm. Do we ever think that if we support the death penalty, that there are people who have to do the killing for us? There are people who have jobs and who have to go home to their children afterwards. Well, Daddy, what was it like when y'all killed that man tonight? And they're doing that in our names. And when we're struggling with the death penalty, there is a moral question where we have to push ourselves and not let ourselves off the hook. Because if we believe that people should be killed for their crimes, could we do it? Could we do it? Or do we have to hire somebody to do it and we don't want to see it? And if we hold back from that, there's a part of our souls that hasn't said yes to the death penalty. This is a deep, deep moral place for us to go. And we are a democracy. And Pennsylvania, that has the people on death row, their names are on your hearts, everybody in this room. And we know how legislators work, and we know how politicians work. But there is no doubt, and we are beginning to see it in the United States, when the people begin to speak, when they write to legislators, when they call when they get their children writing to legislators. Legislators like children to like them. And say, don't do this for us. Look, Pennsylvania, how many millions of dollars have we spent on this symbolism of a machinery of death that we've never used unless people ask us to help them commit suicide and they want to die anyway? Where could that money go? To at-risk kids and to people with addictions, or to help our police force, or to shore up community policing, to put the money into life. And don't, when we get to, we say, oh, well, you know, now we're in practical considerations because you're talking about the economy. And I mean, the moral questions are over here. Martin Luther King said the most moral document we'll ever look at is a budget. And the way we use our resources for violence and for war, or to strengthen the social fabric of our society so that people have what they need for decent lives, like affordable housing and health care. What a sin that the health care of children was just vetoed, when there are how many millions of children without health care? What was the reasoning in people that enabled them, the rationale that enabled them to do that? All the life issues are connected. And if we're going to be people for life, we got to be people for life across the board. I'm in the death house with Pat 3 days before it happens. And he had said to me, Sister Helen, you can't be there at the end. You just pray God holds up my legs. But I don't want you there at the end because it could scar you. He had been through his own journey. One of the guards on death row said, I never saw a man more sorry and remorseful than Patrick Sonnier. When he first came up to death row, he couldn't even eat. He said, it was never supposed to happen. And in Dead Man Walking, you can get the full story of how it happened. The truth of it is that Eddie, the brother, who was very volatile and very emotional, shot and killed the kids that night, and his brother Pat was dying for him. That is what really happened, and the truth emerged in it. But by the time Eddie came and he had been given a life sentence and said, no, look, I really did it, nobody believed him. They said, oh, you got off the death sentence, now you're trying to get your brother off. How did Eddie not go crazy on the night of April 5th, 1984, when they killed his brother? And I know why he didn't go crazy, because Pat's hands were handcuffed, and as we moved into the final hours, I wrote the letter for him, which the guards delivered to Eddie, who had been taken into a cell, stripped of his clothes, with just a blanket around him, sitting there on his bunk as the hours ticked away, in which they were going to kill his brother. And the guard walked in and said, there's a note for you. And Eddie looks down, and there's the note, dear Eddie, don't worry about me. I'm straight with God, and I've cleared up my soul with God. I'm so sorry for what has happened. I've taken my responsibility for it. But Eddie, you got to control your temper in this place, or they're going to kill you. And he signed it, your loving brother, Pat. And Eddie read that letter for 3 years every night before he could go to sleep. And I'm over in the death house, another part of the prison, way, way back, 5 miles deep in the prison. And it's where the electric chair is waiting. And as we move into the last day and the hours that you have no way of knowing that a person's going to die just by looking at them, because it's not like dying in a hospital where you fade and you don't talk, you don't eat. He's alive, and he's talking to me, and we've been down the road 2.5 years together, and he's giving me his Bible. After he signs it, you know the front of the Bible, it has births and deaths. He signs the date of his birth, he signs the date of his death. He said, look, sister, I wrote it in my own hand. And all I could think was, Jesus said, you don't know the day and the hour, but you know the day and the hour and the minute when the state kills you. And this is not to condone that crime. The crime is unspeakable that 2 innocent children would have been killed that night. I will always be in horror of the crime. But now I'm brought in to what it means to kill somebody and to do it legally, with the Supreme Court saying it's okay and not against the Constitution, and the state legislature in Louisiana passing the statute. And the polls of people in Louisiana in 1984, 80% of people thought this was a great idea. This is what we had to do because people are so afraid of crime. They go, yeah, if we kill the real bad ones, then they won't kill the witnesses, and it'll deter other people. Or all the stuff we were told about why we had to do this. But now I'm with him. And at 10 o'clock at night, this is going to happen at midnight, the guards went in to prepare his body. And they shaved his hair off and his eyebrows off. And they cut the pants leg, the left blue jean pants leg below the knee, and shaved around the calf of his ankle where the electrode was going to go. And the guards, they all have their eyes down. They all going in. They're all doing their job. As the warden told me, sister, nobody's doing cartwheels over this. But they get involved in it too. And they prepared his body for death, and that was the only time he really had a moment of weakness, because when he came out of the cell, and he was in a chair right near this metal door with a mesh screen, and I was on the other side, and he walked out of the cell, and his knees gave way. And he fell down on his knees by the chair, and he went, Sister Helen, I'm going to die. And I was scared out of my mind. I was praying, Jesus, please don't let him fall apart, because I didn't know what I would do. I had never done anything like this before. The only private place I had in the death house was the women's room. And I'd go in there and put my head against that tile wall. The movie got this. And just say, please, God, don't let him fall apart. It was a very selfish prayer, because I didn't know what I would do. If he began to come all apart emotionally, what could I have done? So I prayed with him, and I said, Christ is here, Pat, and you have all the grace you need. And we walked. The guards and the warden came right at midnight. It's all a protocol of death. It's a scripted death. And we walked, and I walked behind him, and he said, Warden, can Sister Helen touch my arm? And I put my hand on his shoulder and read to him from Isaiah 43, I have called you by your name, and you are mine. I wanted him to know his dignity. And in the second book, The Death of Innocence, in the second story, Joseph Odell, killed in Virginia, I had a chance to dialogue with Pope John Paul, and that's one of the things I said. Your Holiness, when you're walking with a man who's handcuffed and made defenseless, and he says, Sister, please pray that God holds up my legs, is it only the dignity of the innocent that the church upholds? What about the dignity of the guilty? There is no dignity in this death, because he's been made defenseless, and now he's going to be taken and killed. And then I walked with him into the execution chamber, and then the guards took me by the arms, and I was brought with the witnesses, and I said to him, Pat, when they do this, you look at my face. I said, I don't know what's going to happen to me. I've never done this before. Maybe it is going to scar me, but you're not going to die alone. And I thought of the women at the foot of the cross, and I absolutely knew. I mean, I was strong. I just said, you look at my face when they do this thing. And he did. As they strapped him in, I put out my hand. This is in the film. I worked very closely with Susan Sarandon and Tim Robbins on this film. This film is a deep spiritual journey into both sides of this issue. And I put out my hand, and he found my face. And then they put a mask over his face to protect the witnesses from seeing what happens when 1,900 volts are pumped through a human body. And when I walked out of that execution chamber, and I had never in my life seen anybody put to death before my eyes, and I threw up. It was the middle of the night. It was dark. It was cold. And I threw up. And then I remember thinking, you know what? The people are never going to see this. And I've been a witness. And it was just like the first epistle of John. What our eyes have seen, our ears have heard, our hands have touched. This is the gospel. I was a witness, and I had to tell the story. And so from that day on, I began. Pitiful little bitty beginnings. I didn't know how to do this. I'd go to groups, small groups, St. Christopher's Nursing Home. There was an announcement after lunch. Who wants to hear the death penalty? None. And 3 people came into the parlor that day. And I started telling them the story, and 2 of them they went sound asleep on me. I mean, and only this one lady was listening, and I had my eyes locked with that lady, like, lady, don't leave me, like, you're it. And then I began going to the sociology classes at Loyola University, poor kids, captive audience, and learning how to construct the journey of bringing people over to both sides and then saying, think about it, treating people very respectfully, appreciating that this is an emotional, hard issue. And then I wrote the book, Dead Man Walking. And then Susan Sarandon read the book. And then Susan Sarandon came to New Orleans and said, I want to meet with you. I had to go rent Thelma Louise, see what she looked like before we went to that restaurant. I don't know anything about movies or movie stars. The community saying, Helen, be careful if they want to do a movie, because nuns don't do well in these movies. Because you got flying nuns, you got all kind of nuns. Sister Act in bars or whatever. And Susan Sarandon was the one who made that film happen. She stayed on Tim Robbins' case for 9 months till he broke down and read the book. And on the night of the Academy Awards, is this not a miracle? On the night of the Academy Awards, 1.3 billion people were watching. And for those of us who are Catholics in here, it was a feast of the Annunciation. And boy, what an Annunciation it was that night. And the film was given over to the world. And I stay in airplanes, and I go to places, and I say, let me tell you what happened to me, and let me tell you this story, and I want to ask you to reflect deeply about this issue. And I want to say to you tonight, if you know where you stand, 70%, over 70% of the people here in Pennsylvania want a moratorium on the death penalty. Let's start talking about the will of the people. They don't want this. And there's a place for you to sign. Have you ever put your signature on behalf of ending the death penalty? It's calling for a moratorium. And then if you put a little star by your name, we're going to give it over to the group that is working here in Pennsylvania to organize and to educate people and to start getting to those legislators so that you can end the death penalty in Pennsylvania, and don't think it's not possible. Maryland is very close, New Jersey's very close, and Pennsylvania can be in there too. St. Basil in the 4th century said, annunciations are frequent. You know, like when the angel Gabriel announced to Mary that she was going to be the mother of Jesus. Annunciations are frequent, incarnations are rare. We got to be that incarnation. We got to be that embodiment of making justice happen in our state. And I invite you to do that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You're standing up for Pennsylvania, a life state. I just want to make one little announcement about the books. I'll be glad to sign books for people afterwards. We have some special things happening after the little question and answer, our conversation together. If you get the books, you can get Dead Man Walking and Death of Innocence for $25, and it helps the moratorium campaign nationwide. We're going to present 5 million signatures to the UN in November. And so put your name on that document of life. And if anybody has a rich aunt, we do have some books signed by Susan Sarandon and me for $100, and that's obviously our fundraising book to help the moratorium campaign. And we want to help the people here in Pennsylvania who are working to end the death penalty. And so now we can have a little time for conversation, and then we have special... Katie, you going to kind of direct us in this? We can have conversation for about 10 minutes, maybe? Yeah. Questions? And are there microphones? If you wait for the microphone to come, there's somebody over there. Is there a microphone over there? Okay. So don't be shy. Go up or let the people with the microphones know. Any questions?
Hi, thank you for your words. I just wanted to let everyone know that we have a group of students from Messiah College who are doing the Dead Man Theater School project.
Oh.
And we've been really changed by the experience, and it's been really profound for all of us. And thank you for making the school theater project possible.
Listen, thank you. What's your name?
Valerie.
Valerie. Listen, there's a play of Dead Man Walking that Tim Robbins wrote. And it's not for Broadway. He's given it over to the young people of the United States to perform. Could all those who are involved in the play project, could you stand? This is the cast of the people who did the play. Thank you. Do you have any more performances? Are you finished? What's that?
It opens November 8th, and it runs through November 18th.
Oh, okay. It's in November. And tell us where it is.
It's at Messiah College in the Kleiman-Haga Fine Arts Center, Miller Auditorium, and you can find all the information online on the theater department website. And I have information with me, so if anyone wants to stop by and see me, I've got posters.
Well, look, where I'm going to be signing the books, y'all come around over there, and people can meet you too. Thank you. Thanks, Valerie, for telling us that. Anybody else? Statement, question?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I was very moved.
Can I interrupt you?
I knew your work, and it had so much inspired me that I wrote a book about Carla Tucker that was just published 2 days ago.
Carla Faye Tucker in Texas?
It's in Greek, because Carla Tucker was of Greek descent.
Yes.
And I'm a writer, a Greek writer, not in English.
You wrote it in Greek?
Yes, I wrote it in Greek, and I mailed it to my publisher, and they published it, and it was received very favorably.
Yes.
In Greece, we don't have that
No,
penalty.
I know.
Not even with the political crimes that we had that November 17, which was a very bad crime.
Yeah.
But they don't execute them.
Good for you.
So I agree with you to abolish,
Yes,
definitely.
yes.
And then we have to make one more step to abolish war.
Yeah. Thank you for making that connection. I see the connection, the war on crime in the United States, where we say some people are so evil we can kill them, moves right over into the war on terrorism. Those terrorists are so evil, we got to kill them too. Where are we going to stop? Thank you. Another person? No, it's not really on, is it? All right, great.
Okay.
We can hear you.
What you spoke about in the beginning of your time here is what is going to stay with me about our country representing the poor properly.
Yes.
That needs to be done.
Yes.
And I want to challenge every single person here to do their part. You spend a good amount of your time sharing only a small amount of your experience, I'm sure, and it really inspired me. And I want everybody not to forget about that.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It's only poor people on death row, you know. Everybody knows if you have money, you don't go to death row. You get a good attorney. They use the maximum of the law, and they make it work for you, and you don't go to death row. Yes.
Hi, sister. So good to see you again.
Great to see you, too.
As you know, here in Pennsylvania, we have a very prominent journalist on death row, Mumia Abu-Jamal. And I'm sure you've thought about his case, and I wonder
Sure.
if you can share any thoughts that you have on that.
I need to be updated about where his case is. I think they're waiting to see what the courts are going to do, right? I mean, this is a man who I believe very unjustly. It's a complex case, as all cases are, but I believe that his side of it, and he's been put on death row, and there are a number of people. I mean, I was in London, and I saw on one of the light post Mumia Abu-Jamal. Carla Faye Tucker's picture is all over the world, too. One country even made it on a commemorative stamp of Carla Faye Tucker, this woman executed. Her story of my involvement with her is in Death of Innocence. But Mumia is one more example of a black, articulate journalist, and questionable of what happened, but it was the killing of a policeman. And I mean, the story of the racism of the judge involved is appalling. And the more you find out about it, you can go on the internet and just pull up Mumia Abu-Jamal. And all you got to do is be able to spell it. And if you don't know how to do that, I'm sure our friend can be there at the table and help you spell it. And just look into the case of one more person that's been on Pennsylvania's death row and the racism. That's an integral part of his being there. I don't want to call this to an end too quickly, but we do have other parts of the program. We have special awards for people who have done special things. And so I'd like to turn over the program now to whatever we're going to do next in it. And who comes forth? My fellow Sisters of St. Joseph have been doing great work here.
I believe that your award is not in my hand right now, so I will say the nice words, and then the award will be given to you. This Justice Award is an award that the Legislative Initiative Against the Death Penalty gives to Pennsylvania citizens that have been recommended for their abolition views on the death penalty, for their advocacy against the death penalty, people that have done all kinds of wonderful work. Kathy Bell is a worker who visits as an official visitor of the Pennsylvania Prison Society. And she particularly advocates for the women on Pennsylvania's death row. And she also has created within her church the Unitarian Universalists of the Cumberland Valley, a justice initiative. And so our award goes to Kathy. She will receive a monetary award to use, we hope, in her work. But also, she will receive a portfolio of exquisite drawings. We have amongst us here an artist who has dedicated her heart and soul to showing how evil the death penalty has been throughout history. She has gotten books and studied the cases of the people that she has drawn. You'll see a small sampling of her work in the lobby, and I hope you will look at it carefully and realize that the death penalty is an old, old evil, and it's an evil that Kathy and the people that work with her on prison visitation, who go to the death penalty people, as Sister Helen did, are the ones who are helping to make it come to an end. And so thank you very much.
I want to thank you and the Legislative Initiative for this award. I feel so proud to be standing here in front of my Prison Society team, the UCV Social Action Council, and friends who support me daily as I do what I do for the women who are incarcerated in Pennsylvania. I cannot get my head around the numbers of people on death row in the United States. I can't even get my head around the numbers of people on death row in Pennsylvania, but I can get my head around 7 women. Since the death penalty was reinstated in Pennsylvania, 7 women have been sentenced to death. Of those 7 women, 4 of their death sentences have been overturned. 4 out of 7. If Pennsylvania can make it so wrong with these 7 women, then our system is broken and it needs to be fixed. I accept this award in the name of Carol, Michelle, Shonda, Kelly, Dolores, Danetta, and Beth, and also Rochelle, who are facing death penalty trials in the upcoming year. Thank you so much.
Good evening. Tonight it is my pleasure to present the LIADP Justice Award to the Social Justice Coordinators representing 3 chapters of the Sisters of St. Joseph in Pennsylvania. This award is given in recognition of their corporate stand against the death penalty and their lives reflecting this commitment. It is significant that our speaker tonight, Sister Helen Prejean, is a fellow Sister of St. Joseph. Accepting for their chapters are Sister Jeanette Busen of Baden, which is in Pittsburgh, Sister Mary Beth Ham of Philadelphia, and Sister Mary Claire Kennedy of Erie. In December of 1998, the Sisters of St. Joseph announced their stand against the death penalty. Their corporate stand was promulgated following months of prayer, education, reflection, and discussion. As a group of Catholic women religious, they opposed the the use of the death penalty for any reason, while remembering with compassion the families of the victims of violent crimes. The missions of the Sisters of St. Joseph is to foster the unity of the entire human family with one another and with God. They strive to promote a just society where punishment will be meted out with an earnest desire for correction rather than retribution. The death penalty is seen as a clear opposition to this mission. Since 1998, the Sisters of St. Joseph have worked and prayed to bring about a moratorium on the death penalty or to abolish it altogether. Each month, each month, an execution alert is sent to their social justice contacts with the names of both the victim and the person to be executed, with the time and the date. As a community, they pray for that person, for the victim of the murder, and for their families and for the families of the person to be executed. The Sisters of St. Joseph belong to a campaign called For Whom the Bell Tolls. Whenever there is an execution anywhere in the country, a banner is hung outside the Mother House Convent as a reminder to everyone who passes that state-sanctioned execution diminish all of us. The Sisters of St. Joseph write to prisoners on death row, attend rallies and vigils, and belong to several anti-death penalty groups. Their work takes them to schools, colleges, parishes, and ministry sites across Pennsylvania, where they provide material and help on a wide variety of social justice issues. As Sister Mary Claire reminded me, it is appropriate that this lecture and award is taking place during the month of October, when the United Nations General Assembly will be introducing a resolution calling for a global moratorium on execution. In recognition of Amnesty International's National Weekend of Faith and Action on the Death Penalty, which this year occurs October 19th to the 21st, the Sisters of St. Joseph are collaborating on petitions to be sent to Governor Randall, calling for a moratorium on the death penalty in Pennsylvania. And as Sister Helen said, you'll have an opportunity at the end of this event to sign these petitions. In closing, it is my hope that you will be inspired by the good works of these sisters, and of course, Sister Helen. But we are not drawn into an issue merely by hearing about it, but by rather doing it. I invite you to become involved. And now it is my pleasure to present our Justice Awards to the Social Justice Coordinators of the Sisters of St. Joseph. And once again, they're sitting back there, so I will see that they get them afterwards. There is a monetary award, and there's also a portfolio of the drawings that Joan mentioned before. So I thank you, sisters, for the opportunity to tell your story. Oh, Joan. In closing, I'd also like to thank the companions of the sisters who came. They're also involved in social justices. And we have with us tonight, if I can find the right part of my paper, Sister Mary Ann Stuckey of Erie, Sister Diane Cawley from Baden, and Sister Dorothy Urban from Philadelphia. And thank you for the work that you do for social justice, sisters.
And it is with great pride and great honor that I thank the LIADP for honoring the Sisters of St. Joseph of Baden, of Erie, and Philadelphia with this award. As Sister Helen said, all of us need a little waking up. And we are much grateful, very grateful to you, Helen, for waking all of us up, your cousins, so that we could join you in this effort. And so on behalf of 1,800, I guess, Sisters of St. Joseph in these three congregations, we thank you, all of you. And please join with us. We can do it in Pennsylvania. Thank you.
On behalf of the Clark Forum, I would like to present Sister Helen with this token of our appreciation. Welcome. Thank you all for coming this evening, and have a good night.